It was the start of winter break, and my older brother Alex, my best friend Tom, and I were enjoying a lazy Friday night, huddled under blankets in the den as a snowstorm raged outside. We were watching an old horror movie, one of those low-budget films where you can tell the actors aren't really afraid of the monster. The storm kept flickering the lights, adding an unexpected layer of tension to the cheesy film. I figured it was perfect timing when the power suddenly cut off, leaving us in total darkness. After a moment, Tom pulled out his phone, using it as a makeshift flashlight. "All right, so who's going to check the fuse box?" he joked, aiming the light around the room to make ghostly shadows dance on the walls. "I'll do it," Alex said, shrugging. He was always the brave one, or at least he pretended to be. As he made his way to the garage, I watched him go, half expecting something to jump out at him from the shadows. But instead, it was Tom who called me over to the window. "Dude, you've got to see this." I joined him, squinting out into the stormy backyard. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just snow piling up on the lawn. But then I noticed it. Footprints. A single line of deep footprints trailed from the woods, stopped at the base of the big maple tree, and then continued right up to the back porch steps. Did you go outside earlier?" I asked, a nervous edge creeping into my voice. Tom shook his head. "I've been with you the whole time. You think Alex—" "No way," I cut him off. Alex would never walk barefoot in the snow, especially not with how deep it was already getting. Just then, Alex came back, looking annoyed. "The fuse box is fine, just an outage. But the power should come back soon. It usually does in storms like this." "Look," I said, motioning him over. "Did you go outside?" When he saw the tracks, his confident smirk faded. "You two are messing with me, right?" We shook our heads, and that's when he started to look a little worried. "Maybe someone just came up and left," Tom suggested, but his tone was uncertain. It didn't make sense. Why would someone come all the way to our backyard in the middle of a snowstorm, then disappear back into the woods without even knocking on the door? Alex took a deep breath, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the back door. Cold air hit us, and the wind howled like it was warning us not to go out. But the three of us stepped outside anyway, pulling our coats tight. We followed the footprints, noticing how they seemed too far apart for someone just walking. Almost like they were leaping. The tracks led us to the big maple tree, where they circled around it twice, then went back towards the woods. We stared into the dark mass of trees at the edge of the backyard, our breath visible in the frosty air. The snowstorm was slowing, but the world was eerily silent, like even the birds had stopped to watch us. "Let's just go back inside," I whispered, breaking the silence. But Alex shook his head. Let's see where they lead. I mean, don't you want to know?" Part of me did, so we trudged forward, our feet crunching in the fresh snow. The footprints seemed fresher now, like they were filling in slower, as if they'd been made not too long ago. "Hey, wait," Tom said, his voice shaking. He pointed ahead where the tracks led to a dark figure, standing still at the edge of the trees. We froze. It looked like a person, but it was too shadowy, too indistinct. Just standing there facing us, with no face we could see. The flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment, the figure seemed to move closer, though I hadn't seen it take a step. My heart hammered, and I could feel Tom's hand grip my shoulder, his fingers ice cold. "Let's go back, now," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Alex didn't argue this time. We turned around and walked as fast as we could, without breaking into a full sprint. But every few steps I'd glance back, half expecting to see the figure standing right behind us. But each time, it was gone. When we finally made it back to the house, we slammed the door shut and locked it, our breaths heavy. I pulled the curtain back to check, but the tracks were gone. It was as if the snow had swallowed them up. We sat there in silence, none of us daring to speak about what we'd seen. The power came back on not long after, and the movie resumed, but none of us felt like watching it anymore. Even now, whenever I look out at the maple tree, I can't help but think about those tracks and the figure in the woods. Some nights I think I hear footsteps in the snow, just beyond the edge of the yard. I tell myself it's the wind, but deep down, I know we never really figured out what was out there that night. And maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting for us to follow it back into the woods. I'm recounting this story from way back, but it stuck with me unlike any other. My friends Chris, Liz, and I had planned it for weeks, eager to escape the city and relax by the lake. We set up our tents, collected some firewood, and spent the first evening talking, laughing, and roasting marshmallows as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The lake was quiet, barely a ripple on the surface, reflecting the star-strewn sky perfectly. After a while, the conversation died down, and we all sat in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle sounds of the forest. Then Chris broke the quiet, looking across the lake. "Hey, do you guys see that?" he asked, pointing to the opposite shore. Liz and I squinted, trying to see what he was talking about. At first, I didn't see anything, but then a faint light appeared, flickering between the trees, as if someone had a lantern and was moving slowly through the woods. "Is there another campsite over there?" Liz asked, hugging her knees. "No," I replied, frowning. "I checked the map. This is the only cleared spot by the lake for miles." We watched the light for a few moments, half expecting it to disappear, but it kept moving along the shoreline, coming closer to where we were sitting. Finally, Chris broke the silence again. "Should we go check it out? I mean, maybe someone's lost or something." Liz shook her head quickly. "Or maybe it's someone who's going to make us lost." Despite her hesitation, curiosity got the better of us. We grabbed our flashlights and reluctantly made our way around the lake. As we walked, the light in the distance vanished, as if whoever or whatever was carrying it had noticed us and decided to hide. But by then, we were too far from our camp to turn back without feeling like cowards. We kept going, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. I could feel the chill in the air, much colder than it had been near our tents. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small, open clearing by the edge of the lake. There, standing as if it had been there for years, was a rundown cabin. It looked abandoned, the roof half collapsed, and the door barely hanging on by one hinge. "Did any of you know this was here?" Chris asked, his voice barely a whisper. We all shook our heads, inching closer. The cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Vines crawled up the sides, and the windows were clouded over with grime. I could have sworn that I heard a soft creak from inside, but I couldn't tell if it was my mind playing tricks on me or not. Liz grabbed my arm. "This is stupid. We should go back." Just then, Chris walked up to the door, gave me a look and said, "5 minutes. Let's just peek inside. I want to know why there was a light over here." Before any of us could argue, he pushed the door open. It groaned, echoing in the quiet of the forest. Inside, the cabin was even darker than I'd expected. Chris turned on his flashlight and swept it across the room, revealing a dusty table, a broken chair, and what looked like an old cot against the far wall. As we walked in, I noticed strange carvings on the wooden walls, symbols I didn't recognize. I reached out to trace one with my finger when a loud thud echoed from behind us, followed by a scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. Liz let out a small gasp, and Chris swung his flashlight toward the noise. "Did something just close the door?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I took a step back, only to feel my heart nearly stop when I realized the door was, indeed, shut. And now we were locked in the cabin. The scratching sound continued, this time from the floorboards right beneath our feet. Liz grabbed my hand, her face pale. "Someone's under there." Before any of us could move, the sound stopped. The silence was so thick I could hear each of us breathing. And then, without warning, a loud bang erupted from beneath the floor, as if something was trying to break through the wood. We scrambled toward the door, pounding on it, desperately trying to get out, but it wouldn't budge. And then a voice, a low, raspy whisper, filled the room. "You came all this way?" My blood ran cold, and I felt Liz's grip tighten on my arm. I turned, aiming my flashlight at the floor, expecting to see something. But the room was empty, except for us in the dust-covered furniture. Finally, Chris managed to wrench the door open, and we tumbled outside, gasping for air. We ran back around the lake, not daring to look back until we'd reached our campsite. We all sat by the fire, shaking, too afraid to speak. I was the first to break the silence. What was that?" Chris didn't answer. He just stared back at the lake, his face pale. Liz finally whispered, It's gone. We all looked. The light was back, drifting slowly along the shoreline, heading toward the cabin. Only this time, there was a figure walking alongside it, a shadowy figure that didn't seem to belong to anyone, yet cast no reflection on the water. It lingered there, just watching us. We packed up our things that night and left before dawn. None of us spoke about the cabin again, and none of us dared to go back. But sometimes when I'm out camping, I swear I still see that light, flickering in the distance, calling me back to that abandoned cabin by the lake. And every time I feel that same chill run down my spine, reminding me that some mysteries are better left unsolved.